Good evening, everybody. It's great to see so many of you in the room tonight. My name is Jean-Michel Giraud, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the President and CEO of Friendship Place. I want to welcome you to Homeward DC, our spring symposium on the plan to end homelessness in the nation's capital. I want to thank you for being here this evening with us. We are looking forward to a very interesting conversation on this topic. I would like to start by thanking New York University for hosting us this evening in this beautiful venue. I'd like to thank Polly Turgeon and our former board member and current volunteer Chuck Herrick, who teaches here at New York University, for making this happen, making the connection with the university. I would also like to thank all the donors in the room, individual donors. There are many of you. We appreciate your support, as well as representatives from the foundations who support our work. We could never do this work without you. You know this. We also value our partnerships with the DC Department of Human Services, the DC Interagency Council on Homelessness, both represented on the panel, as you know, this evening, and with the Community Partnership for the Prevention of Homelessness, as well as the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, all great partners. Friendship Place is a vibrant, solutions-driven homeless services organization serving D.C. and the D.C. metropolitan area with a national impact through best practices. We work to empower people, each person experiencing homelessness or on the brink, to rebuild their lives with housing, employment, and other supports. I think it is fair to say that unprecedented efforts have been made to address homelessness in the district under Mayor Bowser's leadership, and the results are obvious. Homeward DC has provided a roadmap to plan and track our progress in this work. Tonight's conversation is designed to help us establish how far we are on the roadmap and what remains to be done. It is also designed to highlight what advocates, philanthropists, and corporate partners can do to help us reach our goal to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurrent, to borrow the phrase from the Homeward Plan. Through this, we also hope that you, the constituents, will find out what you can do, what role you can play to end homelessness in the district. Some of you, I know, already know this, but others will find out. To the youth advocates in the room, please know that we will be talking about youth homelessness and the Solid Foundation's plan, the other plan, because the solutions we are developing do need to be all-encompassing. And Friendship Place is proud of its work with youth on the street in all 8 wards of the city, and at B430, our privately funded case management program. I would like to thank our talented panelists for sharing their time and expertise this evening with us. We regret to let you know that DC Council member Brianne Nadeau is unfortunately not able to join us, but we do connect with her on a regular basis, and she has been very supportive of our work. As you have seen, we are collecting questions. We'll be doing this during the onset. We'll be also doing this later on in the program. If you have a last-minute burning question, do flag us. We'll be happy to collect it and to put it to our panelists. The closing remarks this evening will be offered by our Chief Development Officer, Chris Rutledge. Before I close, I would like to extend a very special thank you to Charisse Malachi on our staff for organizing this event, along with thanks to the development team and to all the Friendship Place participants, staff, volunteers, and board members who are here tonight. We appreciate your support so very much. The support we received on the private side is essential at Friendship Place. So again, a heartfelt thank you to all of you who have been supporting us. And if you are not a donor yet, please consider helping us so we can keep organizing events like this and help the close to 4,000 people a year who come our way for solutions. Help us help them. And now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Ray Suarez. Ray is a broadcast journalist and author. He is the host of World Affairs on KQED FM in San Francisco and online through the World Affairs Council of Northern California. Before this, he was, as many of you know, the host of Inside Story on Al Jazeera America and chief national correspondent on the PBS NewsHour. Ray has authored a number of important works, including Latino American, the 500-year legacy that shaped a nation, published by Penguin Random House in 2013. Ray and his wife, Carol, who is here tonight, are supporters of Friendship Place. They've made a very special trip from Philadelphia to be with us this evening and are heading off to New York right after this. So we are deeply grateful for your support and Ray, for your support with the symposium yet another year. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Jean-Michel. Let's bring the other panelists in here and get them seated. The District of Columbia's success in attracting new residents, new businesses, new inward investment has reinvigorated big tracts of the city that a generation ago were in a kind of urban death spiral. Places of declining home value, declining population, and declining commercial activity. There was plenty of homelessness in that pre-boom district. But what the last 25 years demonstrates is that housing people only becomes more crucial and at the same time more complicated at a time of rising employment, rising home values, rising rents, and a more secure fiscal situation for the District of Columbia government. Designing policy that responds to all of these crosswinds at the very same time, marshaling the power of a wide range of stakeholders, and taking a longitudinal view of program life. That is, if we can do this now in this place with this population, will we still be able to do it 1, 3, and 5 years from now, no matter what happens in the local economy, no matter what the situation is in land use, and any one elected official's or group of elected officials' commitment to a policy and a funding stream? In short, it's complicated. Joining us to discuss Homeward DC, its present, its future, Laura Zeilinger, Director of the DC Department of Human Services. Kristy Greenwalt, Executive Director of the Interagency Council on Homelessness. Bruce McNamer of the Greater Washington Community Foundation. Jennifer Knox of the Washington Interfaith Network. And Waldon Adams, a graduate of the Neighbors First program, now working at Pathways. Please welcome our panel. As was mentioned by Jean-Michel in his introduction, the mission statement for Homeward DC says, "Together we will end long-term homelessness in the District of Columbia. By 2020, homelessness in the district will be a rare, brief, and non-recurring experience." Mayor Bowser added at the time of the adoption of the plan that the goals were ambitious yet achievable. 2020 begins in 9 months. Let me go across the panel and ask a very broad question, but from each of your perspectives, how's DC doing?
Great. So first of all, thank you everyone for coming this evening. This is a very opportune or appropriate topic at a very good time as we are working on a report looking back over our progress over the last 4 years, which will be forthcoming. There's good news and there's bad news. We are making progress. The plan is working. I think you hear partners like Jean-Michel and folks that are in this work doing it every day who see dramatic difference. But I think from the average person's perspective, maybe walking down the street, it's hard to see that difference quite yet. But the way our system operates is fundamentally different today than it was 4 years ago. And what hasn't changed, though, is the need. So we see as much need as we have ever seen, but at the same time, our system is changing. And so when we talk about making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring, what we're really talking about is we know we probably, especially in our lifetimes, we can't prevent people from slipping into homelessness. Poverty is a reality, deep poverty, discrimination, all these things that impact people, but we can control the system. We created the system and we can create a much better system, one that prevents homelessness whenever possible, one that makes sure that there is safe, dignified emergency housing in real time when people need it, and one that quickly works to stabilize people and get them back into housing. So those are the changes that we're seeing in our system. Very quickly, we've launched comprehensive system reform in the family system, and over the first 2 years of Homeward DC implementation, we've seen a nearly 40% reduction in family homelessness. So we know that what we're doing is working. On the single adult side, in large part because of the difficulty of both deploying that level of comprehensive reform across the system at the same time. In the single adult system, we started by really emphasizing moving long-term chronically homeless adults into permanent supportive housing, thinking that was the right place to start in the single adult system. We've helped over 5,000 single adults exit the streets and shelter into permanent housing over the last 4 years. I think most people wouldn't know that just looking and walking down the street. But without the intensive interventions and prevention, without shelter reform, and without the same scale of housing assistance, we've had a housing resource for every family entering the shelter system in recent years, and on the single adult side, we've had about one housing resource for every 10 adults. So we have a lot of work to do to serve the need in the single adult system, but the infrastructure is getting put in place.
Laura Zeilinger, how would you answer that question? How are we doing?
So I agree with Kristy in that we really have focused on the important system reform to, as a community, make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. And so we have are creating the proof point in the family system. So in addition to the reductions that Kristy noted over 2 years, there are about half as many families in shelter today as there were 3 years ago. So we see that we are preventing homeless so much more frequently for families. There are more than 6,000 families who have come in seeking support during a housing crisis that we've been able to help stabilize without a shelter stay. And families are moving more quickly into housing, and what shelter looks like is fundamentally different. We closed DC General. We have opened 3 new short-term family housing sites, small, dignified, beautiful settings, and there are 3 more that are that will open within the next year or so. So we have all of the pieces in place, and we see the reductions. So we know that what we need to do, and there are a lot of lessons learned that we're taking. We're a self-critical group of folks in this community, all of us in government and in our partners in the Interagency Council, about where are the adjustments that need to be made. And so while I'll say that we will not be successful at ending homelessness in the way that we define it, because we don't want to define our way into success, we can see progress. And so while sometimes when we talk about the crisis of homelessness, in which it is, it doesn't feel right to acknowledge where we've been successful because there are so many people who are still suffering. And there are so many people who are still suffering, and we have a lot of urgency around that work. But it's also important to note that this is not an intractable problem. This is not a problem that cannot be solved. There are still people who say to me, well, there are those folks who just choose homelessness, and there's not a whole lot you can do about them. So is this really a problem that can be solved? And nobody actually really chooses homelessness. Sometimes they give up, that the supports are there for them to experience a different reality. And so I'll say that we have proven that we know what to do when we invest in the right things and we work together as a community. This is a problem we're solving, and we will not stop until we do. and we remain energized around the goal.
So we've heard from government. We should also hear from the private voluntary sector. Jennifer Knox, how would you answer that same question?
I think I'd look at the Washington Post article that maybe came out last week, noting that over 20,000 African American families had been displaced from this city in the last decade, and ground us in the fact that while there's been very important decisions made, we're not nearly doing enough in this city. And I think that we've got to be concerned about not just those who are homeless living on our streets, but those who are displaced from this city. And that we need our residents and our government leaders and our corporate leaders to make system change. And I don't think small adjustments are going to get us there. We're going to need some big decisions and some strong backbones coming up against huge decisions that are going to be made in our city over the next 4 years and over the next decade that have the ability to shape the character of this city for generations.
Waldon, you've seen this from all sides, both dealing with homelessness yourself and now helping people get into shelter. Has the system improved since you were faced with the predicament yourself?
Yeah, you're right. I have seen it from all sides. I work in outreach now, and I know we've gone from a system of no help or no hope at all. I mean, there was a time when I saw an outreach worker, and the only thing I can expect from them was maybe some gloves or something to eat, which is good, but it was never anything substantial like maybe housing or anything else to help us. Now I can only speak to permanent supportive housing and chronically homeless people with chronic illness and stuff like that. Like in my situation, where there was no hope at all, and I'm one of the first people that was housed under the Housing First method, and last Sunday would be 10 years for me, and I'm still housed. I'm also celebrating 10 years sobriety, so my life has changed tremendously. And I also work in outreach, so I have pictures, I have proof of people with keys in their hands. Life has changed. I have a client that's going for a master's degree. She's been housed for the last 4 years. She went, finished, and got her bachelor's. She's now on a master's program. I have people that working in advocacy now that were on the street dying. I've had some people that passed. I've had some people recently in the last year that have died, but you know what? They didn't die in the street. They died in their homes, in their own bed. So I've seen the change, and I know that the system works. I'm sitting on the ICH board. I hear people, they're always evolving with different solutions. They listen to us, people with lived experience, and we're always making tweaks to this program. It's not a perfect thing yet, but I think it can be done with more funding, and especially funding for outreach.
And Bruce McNamer, if a network of donors and organizations see improvement, as a practical matter, does it get harder to beat the bushes because people think the problem's on its way to being solved? Or is there a feeling like, wow, success, I'm willing to invest in that?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. And I would, just to echo some of the sentiments here, say that one, we are making progress. And that a function of doing a lot of the hard groundwork, laying work that folks in the administration have done. This mayor has been committed and consistently committed to addressing this problem since taking office. And she's put together a great team, and the Homeward DC plan is a real workable plan, and it does point to, as Laura said, this is not an intractable problem. But let's be thoughtful, let's be systems-based in our approach, and let's make the commitments year in and year out. And at the same time, we have a long way to go. It's some of the factors, Jennifer, that you cited, and that you cited in your introduction, Ray. Washington continues to thrive. The pressures in terms of housing affordability continue to be exacerbated. We, in the philanthropic sector, are keenly aware, particularly here at the Greater Washington Community Foundation, of both that progress and what remains to be done. But I will tell you that it's abundantly clear to us, and probably to anybody in this room, that this work is not going to be done exclusively by the government or the frontline service providers and advocates. This is all of our jobs. And I think if we can point to some successes, one, it is, and I've seen this in my tenure, it's because of the progress that's been made, there is a building sort of sense that there are competent people in charge, that commitments are being made, and that now is a time for all of us to step up. And in the philanthropic sector, that's certainly, I mean, we believe that to the extent that working particularly closely with Kristy, are putting together a partnership to end homelessness ourselves, to bring others of us to the table, from the philanthropic sector, from the private sector more broadly, from business, because ultimately government can't do this themselves. They need the partnership of people who are providing jobs, who can provide kind of catalytic funding of a different type, who can be more flexible in terms of how they think about where grant monies might go. But there are enough proof points, I think, to date to engender the kind of confidence that would say, yeah, we got to get on board with this. And that's part of what has given birth to this partnership.
The peculiarities of the district make this a fascinating thing to watch for a reporter, but also, I'm sure, a challenge for anybody who makes policy. I've covered homelessness as a reporter, deep dive, long-term in LA, Chicago, New York, and in those places, you move inside the boundaries of the city from one neighborhood to another, but you're still sort of overseen or looked out for by a similar set of agencies. In LA, you move within the massive LA County system, which shares criminal justice, which shares a hospital system, which shares a county and city police force, all the different pieces of municipal governance. But the district is such an odd place in that regard. Not casting any aspersions, kind of odd, but when we go through a set of years like the ones we've had recently, with steadily rising values, with places that hadn't gotten much attention in the urban fabric suddenly revived and connected to transit systems and connected once again in housing, people don't move to other places in the city as readily. The city's small. They're often moving to other jurisdictions, and because we're not a state, they become somebody else's problem. Is that part of how we're solving homelessness in DC? Not that I'm, suspicious of your numbers, but I'm wondering about how the intersection of what's really going on here, places simply becoming much more difficult for working class people to live in, for instance, how that changes things in Prince George's, in Montgomery, in Northern Virginia.
Well, there's no doubt that homelessness and issues around affordable housing and transit and jobs are regional issues. You know, the interesting thing about the district that a lot of folks in this room might know is that we're one of 3 jurisdictions in the country that offers a legal right to shelter. So one thing that actually really makes it challenging in the district is that we do see inflow into our shelter system. Much of it is clearly housing insecure households from the district that are one shock away from homelessness. But we do see inflow from other counties and states, just like other systems around the country. We will only solve homelessness if we think about how to do it as a region. We all have our own constraints and opportunities. As Jennifer said, there's a lot of displacement that has happened. There tends to be a lot of dialogue about, well, who's in the district shelters? You know, I mentioned that on the single adult side, we helped over 5,000 folks exit to permanent housing, and our point-in-time count is remaining flat. And in fact, the number of single adults that touch our system over the last 5 years has increased 20%. So we have more people flowing into our system every year than we ever have. But at the same time, we're helping people exit faster. So as I said, this will only be something that we solve as a region, and those conversations are happening through the regional, the Metropolitan Washington Regional Council of Governments. It's a tricky issue, though, especially when we're not talking about different counties in the same state. We're talking about different states who administer state benefits, and when people cross state lines, their benefits change, eligibility for different programs changes. So these are complicated issues to work out, but those are conversations that are underway. Again, we may be able to provide shelter capacity more readily than Prince George's County or Montgomery County, but there's a lot more land for housing to be constructed in the suburban counties. So again, this is something that I don't see how we address this problem in our community unless we think about it from a regional lens.
Waldon, if you get priced out of housing as a practical matter, can you stay in the district at all? I mean, are there people who are in housing insecure situations who have very few options because of the rapidly rising cost of housing in the district?
Oh, definitely.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Definitely, yeah. I mean, I'm a native Washingtonian. My father was born in Washington, D.C. And while you were talking, I was just thinking that there was a time I could look in the Washington Post and I looked for an ad for room furnished and unfurnished, apartment furnished and unfurnished, and I had a choice. I had a choice of places that I could work. I mean, could live, and it didn't have to be a bad neighborhood. But as time went by and rent started going up and salaries didn't go up with it, you know, it became difficult. I saw a place I used to live at on Urban Street, and I looked it up last night. I couldn't sleep, so I woke up at 1 in the morning. And I looked it up, and the same apartment, one-bedroom apartment I had for a short period of time just got sold for $300,000 and something as a condo. So a lot of places that I used to see and like, wow, if I get my life together, I'm gonna move into this building. They become further and further out of reach. Working doesn't equal living anymore. I mean, I've got people in my caseload that are working full time and can't afford to live here in DC. So I don't work in that area where we deal with regulations on how high a developer can raise the rent or something, but there should have been some kind of cutoff point 10 years ago, 10 or 20 years ago, because we've seen it rise. So.
Laura.
So I think it's important to note, Ray, that phenomenon that Waldon described, that is not unique to the District of Columbia. Our housing is very expensive, but there is nowhere in the country right now where on a minimum wage full-time job, one can afford housing. So this affordable housing crisis is a national problem. This city and this mayor is putting more money into affordable housing than any other jurisdiction in the country, but we're losing affordable housing in some cases faster than we can build it. And so that focus on an entire economic development strategy that is about how do we ensure people have meaningful access to jobs that are going to pay a family wage, a living wage, how are we creating more access to affordability? When somebody receives a housing voucher in the district, they can hold that voucher without a time limit, as long as, and in permanent supportive housing, they're not, they're gaining housing and they're able to stay. But for many people who are not lucky enough to have a long-term housing subsidy, they are constantly trying to figure out how to make it work, and displacement is a real problem.
Among the goals of Homeward DC, right at the top, increase the supply of affordable and supportive housing. Now, big car companies have an interest in serving all parts of the market. So Toyota makes Corollas and Lexuses. But developers often don't approach the housing they build in quite that way. How do you freeze the game so that a unit that's accessible for more families in the district doesn't experience the same kind of rapid run-up in price as we've seen in a lot of places to live? It would take, it would seem to me, sort of extra market forces or market shaping forces. Is the city willing to go there?
Well, you're right, and it does take extra market forces. The ideal is to be able to harness the efficiency, particularly with capital allocation of markets, and yet provide sufficient subsidy and incentives for other players to participate. And that's often done by government Typically, the federal government does that, but it's also done by, and it's interesting, by philanthropy. It's done in kind of an impact investing framework where you'll have philanthropists putting money in to help subsidize the returns on investments in affordable housing. And that, again, trying to harness kind of the power and the capital, the amount of capital that is available for investment, but with sufficient guarantees, sufficient provisions against loss, sufficient mitigation of risk in a subsidized sense that you can actually engender more capital investment. And then there are a whole set of tools in the government toolbox around zoning and how we think about regulation, how we think about density in this city, how we think about height. There are a whole host of things there on the philanthropic and government side as well. Community land trusts. They're thinking anew about covenants that ride on the original provision of subsidized housing. So there are tools in that toolkit, but as you say, this is a big tide, and getting in front of it has never been more important.
I'm inclined to agree, and what came to mind for me is that I really love the vision that is laid out in Homeward DC in terms of, this vision of ending homelessness. I'm going to argue, though, that in 2019, it's not going far enough, and that the conversation we need to be having is about how do we build economically and racially equitable city? And is that really at the heart of what we want to do? And if it is, then we have to make some different decisions, and our government has to lead, certainly, our citizens have to lead, and the private sector, needs some external forces applied to it if we're gonna get there. At WIN, Washington Interfaith Network, I think we're really wrestling with that question. We have had success, and this city has had tons of success on building individual properties that include affordable housing and often permanent supportive housing. However, developers, right, and the kind of wealthiest folks in the world that have their eye on our city are thinking about neighborhoods, right? And they're thinking much bigger than individual properties. And if we don't get to that place of thinking about that, thinking about Reservation 13, for example, where we're really proud that DC General has been shuttered and that there are not homeless families living there, thousands of units of housing will be built on that in that neighborhood. And what percent of them will be for folks who are exiting shelter? What percent of them will be for folks earning under 30% AMI? What percent will be for teachers and other families, young adults like myself? I'm still a renter. I would like to stay in this city. And if we get stuck in just ending homelessness and just properties and just increasing units without thinking about the broader landscape, I think we're going to be disappointed in the city we see.
I want to hear more from you on what that city looks like in 10 years or 20 years, ideally. If from the values of an interfaith network, a network of institutions with their ears close to the ground, very close to the people they serve, what does a more just Washington look like?
I hope it's a city where I occasionally walk by and see people that I know. What we have been talking about, I think lots of our different theological traditions talk about abundance, right? And we have a city of prosperity. How do we ensure that those who endured the poverty of this city get to be a part of that prosperity? And, our vision is a city where, there's more than enough for all of us, for those new Washingtonians, but also for those native Washingtonians to still be here. So I hope I recognize some faces, and then I hope there's also, the next generation of new folks that will make our city great. It's a good thing to be growing, and I think we are capable, if we have enough bold vision, to figure out how to do that in a way that does not displace those who have really put sweat equity and generations into this city.
If we ended up with a series of answers that concentrated the newly housed people in one or two places, I think everybody on the panel would agree that that's probably not a good idea, both for the people who already live in those neighborhoods, but also for the newly housed themselves. It cuts off opportunity to employment. It often cuts off access to schooling and those kinds of things. Yet, part of Homeward DC's goal was to make sure that every ward had skin in the game. Has that lived up to the intentions that were designed into the program at the beginning? Has it been easy sledding? Has every ward said, oh yeah, sure, where's our share? Laura?
So, I mean, Kristy and I both have been in front of a lot of communities, and still are. Sometimes it's more time than we are spending with our own families and loved ones at community meetings, having the very conversation about what it means to bring homeless services to different communities. And we also are out in communities talking with people who are concerned about the people who have come in to live in their neighborhood in permanent housing in ways that hadn't happened before. And so with the closure of DC General, we will have short-term family housing in every single ward. We have won a challenge to a lawsuit that was in Ward 3, all the way up to the Court of Appeals. And we have pending lawsuits in a couple of wards, but we are not stopping, and we will move forward. And as the mayor has talked recently about her goal around 35,000 units of affordable housing, that is also an all 8 ward strategy. What is important, I think, is thinking about welcome and enforcement. So you asked the question really not about homeless services, but also about housing, and I think that is the right question to be asking. And we see that in some neighborhoods where housing has not been accessible or attainable, where people are then able to attain that housing with the subsidies that are now available to them, that there are very few housing partners who are willing to accept their housing subsidies and accept people as tenants. And so that does create concentration within neighborhoods. And so asking that question, if we do have a fair housing law that prevents discrimination based on source of income, how are we enforcing that? How are we welcoming people so that there are not 2 buildings in one part of the city that accept tenants with subsidies? There's no legal reason for that. But instead, they ask the questioner, why are we having issues in these 2 buildings? And what's wrong with the people you're putting in these buildings or the services you're providing to people in these buildings, as opposed to what's going on with us in communities. So there are, I agree completely with Jennifer's comments and what the panel has said about equity and access. And if we as a community are seriously committed to our goals around ending homelessness and being the kind of inclusive city that we pride ourselves on, then we do need to think about ways to question some of those things around access to opportunity in meaningful ways.
Tough to strike a balance, though, isn't it? Because if we imagined a map of the district where there was absolute equal spatial distribution, it would be atomizing. I mean, people would be isolated in ones and twos across the city.
It's about choice.
But it would also undermine the efficiency of trying to get them often intense level of services and after housing care they need, because there was a reason beyond simply not being able to make the rent that made many of them homeless in the first place.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that.
Good.
There are a lot of reasons that cause people to experience homelessness, and so there's a wonderful example sitting up here today of someone who's experienced homelessness and is thriving and is clearly doing amazing. Some people may need some more intensive support, especially right when they exit. A lot of people have simply experienced homelessness because of the reason Jennifer said. They have been priced out of a market, they have lost a job, they have been displaced, they face intense, pervasive discrimination. That is not equivalent with someone who needs intensive services just because they're poor or low income, they lost their job. So our system needs to be flexible. It's not one size fits all. And in fact, the programs that we are building are intended to serve people with needs across the spectrum. So we do have site-based programs for people that have intensive needs. We are seeing in our single adult population it's an aging cohort. So on top of a lot of physical, chronic health conditions, behavioral health, now we're seeing things that simply come with aging, dementia, not being, needing help with activities of daily living. So, there are some people that do need that intensive service, but there are other people who simply just can't afford housing. And there is no reason that they need to be concentrated in any particular part.
Oh, absolutely. But when you're looking at a property, let's say a large multiple dwelling, in the provision of services that follows getting a roof over somebody's head, if people are in ones and twos across the city, is it harder to get them what they need, the aftercare, if you will, than if there are 10, 20 clients in a single property?
So, just as being one of the implementing agencies of those services, I'll say that you noted at the beginning that we're a small city geographically, and that's still true. I mean, we are not LA County. We are not New York City. And so what is really important that we recognize is that people actually have a pretty good idea most of the time about what they want and need, and they deserve choice. And choice about where to live. Not everybody wants to live in the wealthiest neighborhood that is not diverse, and some people do. But some people need and want an environment with on-site services and security and that safety. And having a system that ensures that people have choice is really what we're talking about, and not deciding for them.
How do you gauge the impact of the receiving communities or the receiving properties when you're rehousing people?
So I'll just say that in Ward 8 recently at an ANC meeting where we have the Triumph, which is one of our new short-term family housing programs for families, the ANC commissioner described the program in the building is a beacon of the community. So there is a lot of fear before something happens about what it's going to look like, what it's going to be like, how it might change the fabric of a neighborhood. Oftentimes, once it's in place and people realize that their lives have not changed and that they have opportunity to be part of the solution and be involved, their feelings about that in their neighborhood really do shift. But that does depend on us doing those programs the right way, having the right services, making sure that we are good neighbors in the community, and continuing to go out and have conversations and debunk the myths. But in the end, people generally forget that's even what that is, if it's not something they're involved in, that it's homeless services, or they actually find that it is not the thing that they were scared about.
And if I can just add to that, so I was on a similar circuit that these ladies were on, and I want to just commend them for the many late nights, many hot meetings, and many questions answered kind of in the effort to both close DC General and get approved and open replacement facilities all across the city. And what I would argue is, yes, there were many people who came out and had concerns about the impact that a short-term family housing, facility for families would have, or a shelter, or any affordable housing might have. Our job as community organizers was to organize the silent majority, because what we found time and time again is that lots of people, when you went and knocked on the doors, had some sort of personal connection, whether it was, yeah, well, actually, I've got a son who's still living here. And you know why he's still living here? Because he can't afford to, get their own place. Or whatever it may be, had some sort of experience in their own life that helped them to understand the importance of affordable housing, the importance of deeply affordable housing, shelter, supportive housing, a variety of things across the spectrum. And so, what we found is when we could agitate people to join a conversation, and not everybody likes to spend their evenings in hot, basements with some people yelling, right? Partially it was like, hey, would you please come to this meeting that may not be that fun, right? When clearly you have other things you could be doing.
If
But
that's
that
the
there
way
was-
you're selling it, maybe I can give you some advice.
So we had to reframe, right? The opportunity for them to speak their values, right? And the importance of making that public. But I really don't think that there's as much folks that are against. I think they are dwarfed by the people who see the importance, know the importance because of their own background or own life, or and have values that say, hey, actually, this neighborhood, we've got space for everyone, and we can figure that out how to do that skillfully.
Well, I ask about receiving neighborhoods and receiving properties not because I'm trying to depict them as justifiably scared, as much as trying to understand what kind of groundwork has to be laid so that the best kind of relationship can exist. Because I'm sure if the people are ready for their new neighbors, as opposed to not ready for their new neighbors, you get better results. Is that fair, Waldon?
Yeah, I can never tell this on.
You're on, baby.
But anyway, I actually spoke at a Catholic church recently for a friendship place. And I was at probably about 5 or 6 masses, Saturday and Sunday. And almost at each one, somebody in that congregation came up to me and told me about somebody that they knew, a relative, or somebody that they needed help with that was going through the same type of experiences with affordable housing. So I actually forgot what your question was, but
Getting people ready for their new neighbors when you're rehousing people.
all right, yeah. So we tell them about what exactly we do and the success rates we had. I mean, everybody's not going to be a success story, of course. I mean, it's just like anybody else in the world. I mean, there are people that are going to have issues, but everybody has a right to housing. So,
Bruce?
I was going to say that one of the roles that I think philanthropy particularly can play, but is incumbent on all of us, is a broader kind of education. It is reframing a little bit the narrative of what it is to be experiencing homelessness or to be homeless. And that has been a role that has been, you mentioned Los Angeles or in Illinois or in Central Florida or in Santa Clara County. That is a role that philanthropy has played in putting together broad-based public awareness programs that really speak in a comprehensive way and using stories and other to make the point, I think, that Waldon just made, that and that Kristy has made, that yes, there are folks who do live with, the sort of stereotypical challenges of the chronically homeless. And that might be substance abuse, that may be other things, you might see them on the streets, but they deserve our care as well. But so many of folks experiencing homelessness are folks that, my cousin, or your daughter, or that person at work. And I think telling that story and making that sort of much more the currency by which people think about that is a job for any of us. And I know it's a role that particularly, because the city is sort of hard-pressed, government's hard-pressed to tell that story, that I think we can help to underwrite and to tell consistently.
Can I add? I think the incredible opportunity that we have in this moment in DC is that we are building tons of housing. We're building whole new neighborhoods. And that could create an opportunity where people don't have to get ready if the place that they moved into was already economically and racially diverse from Jump Street. So that is the DC that I want to see, is that is the nature of the city that you moved into and that you're a part of from the beginning. That doesn't take away from the fact that there are segregated neighborhoods in DC right now. And getting the facility approved in Ward 3 was not easy, in part because it was essentially an integration campaign, whatever. I'll try to back off the aggressive language. But I think that was really part of the challenge, is you've got some deeply segregated neighborhoods right now. And I hope that we can right now boldly envision better for ourselves and for the next generation of this city. And maybe we won't have to have such tense disagreements in the future, because really I think it's about relationship and about being a neighbor. And that's actually not something that's wholly unfamiliar to people, or should not be.
What's the incentive for landlords?
I don't know about a landlord, but for a developer, if they want land to build on and hundreds of millions of dollars of city subsidy and free leases on land for 99 years, like they were given at the Wharf, Navy Yard, right? Lots of other developments. I think the incentive is there, and we need to impose expectations and accountability around what's built there on land that we collectively own.
Well, housing Russian oligarchs, there's a role in the economy for that too. Sorry. The Washington Post has recently covered a large apartment building on Connecticut Avenue where there's been some pushback and some complaints about the city's follow-up after placing rehoused individuals and families there. There have been some public meetings, there's been complaints from original tenants. Explain to me, Laura, the mechanism for handling these problems, for revisiting, for assessing, for handling the complaints of people who are finding that this is not exactly what they thought they were getting into?
So I'm going to back you up for just a second, if you let me, and go back to a comment I made earlier, which is that that not everybody in that building, despite popular belief, who has a housing subsidy and has moved in, was experiencing homelessness or was rehoused with services by our agency. But there are 2 buildings and 1 property management company, by and large, in that Connecticut Avenue corridor who have accepted tenants who have a voucher from the housing authority. And so you have concentration in 2 buildings because they've been willing to say yes when everyone else has said no, and there are people who say, I have a voucher, I want to live up there. That looks like a really nice, safe neighborhood. And so but it is incumbent on us to ensure that people do have access to services. And there have been some very scary incidents there. Incidents that happen because people have mental illness and they are not connected to services, but they are instances that could happen to people with means who, as well, it's really about making sure they're connected to those services. We've added services to that building so that that we can ensure that there are services on site for people who are in our programs or not in our programs. But I think that's where we also need to be asking the question, if we think that it's problematic to have concentration in 2 buildings or 1 building on Connecticut Avenue, why that concentration? Because we know there are a lot of really big multifamily buildings up and down Connecticut Avenue, on Wisconsin Avenue, where people would love to live, but somehow when they apply with a housing subsidy, they're told no.
Fair enough. Somebody interviewed by the Post for the story. No, and you know, my question was not constructed in a way that implied that all the people who have been housed that way are problematic.
It wasn't your implication.
Okay,
It was just, I think, just a common held belief and myth that when people with subsidies moved in, the problem started, and so why are there not more intensive services? Why are they not connected? And so some people have moved in who may benefit and need services and haven't had that access. And we are putting services there for good reason. And we need to offer those services and help people be successful in community, not a doubt, there and everywhere else.
Along the broad continuum of responses, though, you've got all the way at one end, writing everybody in the building a letter saying, deal with it, or trying to find out what the problem is and responding to it. Okay, I just want to know what that consists of.
So we have certainly met with case management staff. We have met with people in that building over and over, and Kristy's done a number of these meetings and may want to speak firsthand. And we have engaged folks, but it's also that people feel like there's something going on in my building and I have a right to know what's going on with my neighbor, when they actually don't, right? We don't get to know their personal health information, and they don't get to know the personal health information of somebody because they may, either. And so sometimes it's what we can say is we are assessing what service needs are, we are persistently offering those services, and we are engaging and we're committed to addressing problems that occur. And we want to promote access to health care and well-being for all residents and ensure that we're doing what we can to do that. But there is a tension between communicating about in a broad way and people wanting specifics about specific individuals in a way that is not legal and not appropriate.
Let me remind you that there are cards at your seats for your questions. In previous years when I've done this, some people have written questions that fill both sides of the card, which makes it very difficult to ask. So if you could frame a question that's actually a question, it has a question mark at the end, and has a sort of limited enough scope that somebody could actually answer it within the bounds of tonight's program, that'll be great, and it'll help us a lot. If once when I was doing a tri-state, and I guess state was in quotation marks, interagency panel like this one, I asked the members, because they were all talking about appropriateness, where it's appropriate to put things. Let's talk about where it's best to put things. And I asked them, have you, Mr. Maryland person, ever said, actually, that's not a good thing for us. The district should take it. Have you ever said that? And they said,
I
no.
heard it.
The idea of regional planning is great, but when it comes to scrambling over the goodies, inward investment, new development, so on, there aren't that many times where places say, you know what, actually that wouldn't be a great thing for us. Maybe Northern Virginia should take it. I'm wondering whether there's a way of, as the urban core of a large metropolitan area, whether it could be recognized that the district actually carries a different kind of burden for caring for the people of this area than other jurisdictions do. I mean, can we actually, is there a way to recognize that in the way that we both collect the money and dole out the goodies, in the way we collect it and the way we spend it? Oh, Bruce, you're shaking your head.
Well, it's to collect the money, and invariably, and we, as a regional foundation, are often involved in these conversations, and it goes far beyond homelessness. It's transportation, it's education, you name it, and you still run against the same problems and a lot of collective goodwill, and yet politically it's so difficult for any jurisdiction to say, basically, let me fund something one jurisdiction over, and that's just a political reality that's very hard to get over. And you know, in one of the most obvious if anything is regional, transportation is regional, and yet coming together around metro funding, which benefits everybody clearly, and getting kind of some limited number of jurisdictions to agree to kind of, we're in for this. That has been a gargantuan task. We've made a lot of progress in the past year, but that's transportation, so obviously regional. And when we start talking about matters of housing affordability and the like, some aspects of which are so private sector kind of dominated, it gets so much more difficult. So I don't have the answer.
Yeah, yeah. No, I just wanted to kind of remind the audience that this isn't as simple as common sense. Common sense dictates a lot of things, but it doesn't necessarily happen that way. How can you tell what you're doing is working? Month in, month out? I mean, how do you know 1 year to the next whether what you're doing is working?
Yeah, so as Laura said, I think we have a team that is very self-critical and is consistently looking at data to understand where things are working and where they're not. I think one thing that's changed over the last 4 years that is really important to us is that our data is better than ever. We know more about who's experiencing homelessness and what that experience looks like so that we can design interventions to meet that need. As I mentioned, we're working on a progress report that looks back over the last 4 years with the intent that as we update the plan and develop a Homeward DC 2.0, it will be based on that foundation of new knowledge. So again, we are looking at different data reports and dashboards. As Waldon has said in the ICH, we are consistently not just inside government, but with our partners, with the providers around the table, with folks with lived experience, to understand what is this data telling us. Really important, I think, piece of our work over the last couple of years has been standing up a work group comprised of folks with lived experience who advise us on what's working and what isn't and what's happening on the ground. So there's a lot of different ways that we are trying to be self-critical about what's working and what isn't.
Walden, if you could break it down for the people in this audience about what works. When you're trying to rehouse somebody who's been housing insecure, as someone with your unique set of experiences, what would you tell them works and what doesn't, maybe?
Would I be talking to the person that I'm working with, or?
Trying to get buy-in from a citizen of the District of Columbia.
I do that all the time.
Well, that's why I asked you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's obvious. I mean, sometimes I just, I don't know. My mind is racing so much. How I tell them what works is, well, for one way I tell them my story about what happened with me. I'll tell them not something specific about a person's name or anything, but one of my clients. I tell them about what happened with them, how they got housed, and what they went through. There's some neighborhoods that people see where they used to see people at the gas station panhandling or doing certain things. I have a neighborhood where a lady used to hang her clothes up all the time. She was from the islands. They're gone now. If you go through that neighborhood, you don't see any of them. It's working. I live in a building where nobody spoke to me at all. I just moved recently, a few months ago. And I'm in a building that's not very diverse. And when I walk in there, people are just, they didn't speak to me at all. I felt alone in there. But I was so happy to be in there. I mean, it's a beautiful building. I have a gym and everything. The first place I went to was horrible. I live in this building now. I don't cause any trouble. Now people speak to me. I have people that come by and the management speaks to me. They know my name when I walk in. I mean, things have changed a lot. The program's really working. I've seen people's lives change. I've seen people that when they move into a place, I mean, they may be struggling with addiction or mental health, but something happens to a person when they move in and get their own keys and they realize they got a place to stay, that now they can go to treatment or someplace. I've had people say like, hey, I want to go to treatment. I want to get my life together. Because I mean, in the past, I mean, I come from this school of people where when we went into treatment, the only thing we thought about was how we going to sign up to see the social worker so we can figure out where we're going after we leave here. But now we have this program now where a person gets housed first. Then we have somebody come in there that we offer them services where they can get treatment or something like that. And when you go to treatment now, you don't have to worry about where you're going after you leave there. So now you can actually get something out of that program. You can listen to somebody say, hey, well, maybe I should stop, or maybe I could live this life of abstinence. I don't believe in harm reduction. I think that's the most ridiculous thing in the world. And people probably not going to like me for saying that. But I believe in total abstinence.
Hey, I asked you. So
Yeah. So that gives me the opportunity to impress upon a person that maybe it's time to change. Anybody that I work with, I let them know that this is the most valuable thing you can. I'm talking about permanent supportive housing, and that's mainly what my area is. And when I talk to a person, I tell them that this is the most valuable thing you can have right now. I mean, you have a low income. I work with people that'll never be working full time. They'll always be on Social Security. Even myself, my health is deteriorating. And I mean, even though I've gotten in housing, they said I ran 20 marathons. I did, but my health is failing now. I have a bone deterioration, a lot of stuff going on. So I wasn't cured, but my life has gotten better. I've had people, like I said before, I had people that have died, passed away. I had one guy that had the voucher in his hand. He had just left a briefing meeting, and he had it in his hand. He went to meet me at Salvation Army, and he died of a heart attack. But he had hope. He had hope that he was going to have some place to live. I had one guy that died in his bed in where he lives. He didn't die in the street, he died in his bed. And that's way better than dying on the street where people take your shoes and your clothes. Well, I've seen that happen too. It's working for a lot of people. People's lives have been changed. I can offer a little bit of hope. As an outreach worker, I can't go out and tell a person, like, yeah, well, you're signing your name up and this is a list and you're going to get housed real quick. I wish I could. I wish we had more capacity for that. Yeah, but now there is hope. There are people that are looking, that are coming up to us. I have people in neighborhoods calling me saying, I got this person on such and such a street. They've been out there for a long time. They're really sick. Can you help this person? So now they really believing that we can do something. And I see these are professionals right here. They really care. Laura and Kristy, I'm in meetings with them. I see what they do. It's not like this mouth talking. I mean, they show us a lot of charts and stuff like that. I have no idea what these charts are about, but I see the work being done. I'm out there on the ground. I'm the person that goes and puts a person, I give them advice for that, which is a housing survey. I sit in the CAP meetings where the matches are actually made, so what they talk about in those meetings, I see how it really works, so I can come back and tell them, oh yeah, you're showing all these charts and all this stuff, but this is how it looks when I sit in that CAP meeting and they're making those matches. So I actually get to see the groundwork done. So yeah, I can tell people that it works.
So Kristy and Laura, I think that's a rave. I think. Let's go to our questions. What are the causes of displacement of black residents from the city? What tax policies are in place to help low-income citizens to remain in their homes as their neighborhoods become gentrified and as assessments rise? You spoke to this specifically, Jennifer.
What are the causes? Ooh, plentiful, too many probably to name. And it's not that we don't have some good individual policies happening, but I would argue that we have too many bigger policies of displacement. What's causing people's displacement is when we tear down public and affordable housing. We give people sometimes vouchers, but very often they, as I think Laura was saying, they try to approach a apartment in DC, they won't accept that voucher, and they end up, in Maryland or further out using their voucher. And maybe that building may be rebuilt a decade later, but by that point the person's moved on and the rates of return are abysmal. And we could start by not displacing them in the first place. We could do build first. There's all sorts of excellent policy and precedent around this that we could implement.
Why is the Zone 3 temporary homeless facility designed for single adults and not for families? I'm not sure. Do they mean Ward 3? Do you mean Ward 3 question? Is there?
So the Ward 3 short-term family housing is for families.
Okay.
There will be 50 families who will be able to shelter at any given time there, who need that emergency housing.
What is Homeward DC doing about homelessness among returning citizens and to prevent homelessness among people leaving incarceration?
That's a great question, and I think clearly that's an important frontier for us. That connection with the justice system and really being able to move upstream and prevent people as they are returning to our community from going directly into the homeless services system is a really important part of our work. I will say right now, I mean, we have, there are about, according to our last point in time count, about 6,900 single adults in the shelter system, or I'm sorry, 6,900 people, about half of which are single adults in the shelter system on any given night. And so we are really, the focus has been how do we serve people in our system, in our care, but as I mentioned, the inflow into our system has been overwhelming, and the number of folks coming from different institutions, whether it be health systems, whether it be criminal justice, that inflow is again crushing us, and I will say that we have a lot more work to do in that area.
Let me just complement that with an example here on the not-for-profit side. Jubilee Housing has been involved in these issues for 30 years, but in the last few years has been in the market basically with Justice Housing Fund and have raised $5 million in philanthropic capital and complemented that with private capital for the rehabilitation and provision of 3 different different housing units for returning citizens, specifically for returning citizens. And again, a really good example of how with some grant money, with some subsidy from philanthropic capital, you can actually afford to provide sustainable housing solutions for these folks who are among the most vulnerable and at-risk people at risk for homelessness.
What services do hospitals in DC provide to a homeless person seeking help for a medical condition?
They should
Are they
be.
obliged to provide services?
Yeah, and our insurance rates are very good in the district. When I think it's about 95%.
Yeah, it's higher. So we have one of the highest rates of people who are insured through if they don't qualify for Medicaid through DC Alliance. So we do have broad insurance coverage, and people who have a need for hospitalization or emergency room should be able to get that need met at the hospital.
But what I will say, I think it's important, and this isn't, I mean, again, all this is much more complicated than it seems on the surface. The challenge that we do have is we're, of course, at a place where a lot of services provided to all of us are outpatient services, and our state Medicaid plan generally assumes that people have a home to go to. So our state Medicaid plan covers only so many days in the hospital, and then often folks will be discharged with a home health aide or nursing services to help care for them in their home while they recover. And if you don't have a home to go to, you do not have the ability to get a home health aide. So what happens is hospitals are also put in a very difficult position of holding on to someone that they can no longer get reimbursed for with some real capacity issues at hospitals right now, or discharging someone to a shelter where their needs are certainly, it's going to be difficult to meet their needs in a shelter setting.
I can also speak to that too, because that's where I spend a lot of my time in the hospitals. I'd love to hear when somebody told me I'm going to be admitted, because I had a place to stay. So I spent a lot of time. I spent 3 or 4 months, a year in St. Elizabeth's Hospital. Back in the 80s, you could spend a month in a psych ward. And I know it's very costly. It's way less costly to house me than it was when I was accessing the healthcare system. And recently, I just had spinal fusion surgery, and I'm one of those people that was able to go home and have a home health care aide take care of me too. So it's a big difference in being discharged to the street.
Mayor Bowser's budget makes steps in the right direction to end chronic homelessness, but meets just 25% of the estimated housing need and does not continue vital homeless street outreach. What can advocates do to increase investments in those life-saving programs?
They can join up with groups like the Way Home Campaign and get involved with their advocacy efforts, because there is some need for a lot more money and put into outreach, because there are a lot of people that are not accessing services, don't know about services, especially up in the upper Northwest neighborhoods. So there's a big need for that. So that was a good question.
The other thing I want to mention too is another key lesson learned, I think, for us over the last few years is that no matter how much urgency we may feel, we've learned there's some natural capacity constraints on how fast we can go. Some of those things are just the available housing stock. And so I think, we have been using a lot of tenant-based resources. I think we will be pivoting towards more new construction and new development in the future. I think the other thing is there's a limit to how much capacity our provider network and the affordable housing developers have to absorb new funding. And that's one reason that we initiated this partnership with the Community Foundation, because one thing that government isn't always the best at is funding capacity building and training and TA. So I think that's one area where the private sector can really help so that we're better positioned to do more and move faster.
And if I can add, if you're in a congregation or other nonprofit organization, you can join up with some of the political education that WIN does. I think that we have to ask more, even when we're doing some of the most in the nation. And part of that is educating ourselves on what are the agreements that happen with developers that get hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And I think when we're knowledgeable about that, it positions us to ask for much more on behalf of the least of these, because this is a city that is growing, that is generally pretty prosperous, and we have to, I think we can be bold about that vision.
There's a kind of theme that runs through all these questions, so I'm going to read them all together. I often see homeless people either passed out or shivering in rain or snow as I walk through the DuPont, Farragut, Logan area. Just north, and this is someone else, just north of, along Corregidor Street, northwest, west of the Embassy of Hungary, there's a tent pitched on the sidewalk. For months, a homeless couple has been living there. How are they helped? A stone's throw from them are folks sleeping each night in cardboard boxes atop the Hahnemann Memorial. This goes on routinely. Kindly address how the intersection of mental illness and homelessness in DC is being actively handled. How are the many living in boxes, roaming the streets, freezing? Are they getting counseled? By whom? What follow-up is there? What accountability? These are the visible residents of the district who are seen in heavily street-trafficked areas where when you see a tent on the sidewalk, it's definitely out of place, and you see that, and you walk past it, and you see the person. It's different from a lot of the more invisible housing insecurity that goes on in the city. I'd like to understand what the mechanics are, what the warning system is when you have a situation like that. Who calls who, and then who calls who, and then what happens, ideally?
So, and this is the work that Waldon does every day in terms of who does what. And there's that is the importance of the work of outreach. And there were questions about how do we ensure that we're funding all of these parts of the system in the mayor's budget. So the way this in some of the systems change work we've done through Homeward DC is to have a common way that we assess people to understand their service and housing needs. And when Waldon talk about the CAP meetings, it's a coordinated assessment and housing placement system, so that we are taking the data from those assessments to make the matches to housing that is available. So it takes people going out, assessing, which happens through street outreach providers, happens when people go into meal programs, happens when people come into our office at the Department of Human Services, happens when people are coming into shelters. At all of the different touch points, people are trained and use a common assessment tool, and we use that data both to prioritize people with for different types of housing, as well as to plan in those charts and like mind-numbing graphs to say, how do we understand the range of needs? So when Kristy talked about our data is more precise and tells us more about what people need, it also drives our funding decisions in the budget about how much permanent supportive housing do we need, the housing plus deep intensive services, how much of that should have on-site services, how much can be tenant-based, who needs first month's rent, security deposit, and help with rent for a period of time while they get themselves back on their feet, but in the long run are going to be able to make things work, do not need a long-term, would benefit from a long-term subsidy, but will be able to be rehoused with short to medium-term help of that nature. Who needs long-term affordability because they're on a fixed income, are too disabled to work, but have their supportive service needs covered or may not need intensive services. So how are we planning for all of that? So the way the system works for the person is if we get a call, we send outreach, and we have a pretty good and decent coverage of the city, but we will send outreach. We will try to engage people who are living outside. We will ensure we're doing housing assessments, and we're using that coordinated housing placement system to get people connected to the housing resources that are available.
And I would just add, I mean, again, we know that housing is the solution to homelessness. It's not shelter, but there is shelter available. And that's one of the things that our outreach workers are doing, is trying to engage people, and especially when severe weather is coming, to provide that early warning and to continue to work to invite people inside and ensure their safety. So that's sort of just an overlay that they're doing that all the time. But then the housing work, of course, is really the key, because again, housing is what's gonna solve homelessness.
Quick comment? Waldon?
Yeah, and then we have, it's like you said before, there's no one size fit all. I mean, I've run across people that are sometimes refusing services, and sometimes you have to develop a relationship with them, get to know them and watch them, and sometimes eventually they come around. I mean, I've had people that lived in tents, and I had one lady in particular, it took me 2 years to trust me to get her picture taken at DMV. So sometimes it's not a very fast process. Sometimes the things are in place for them, but sometimes people are not, as quick to access them.
Bruce, have you noticed an increase in donor-advised grants for homeless services, and especially when most individual donations go to other causes? How do you encourage support for homeless services?
Well, in answer to the first part, no, we have not noticed an increase. I think part of that is a broad, you have donors who are very generous and for whom homelessness is their issue, or not affordable housing so much, but homelessness. And year in and year out, they give. But I think until recently, certainly from our part, we have not tied their donations into a broader kind of systems-based approach. So it's been my support for this particular nonprofit who's doing great work, but no opportunities for them to feel like their dollars are going to complement some of the work that the city might be doing or that nonprofit developers might be doing. And that's a lot of the genesis for what we're doing with the city around the partnership to end homelessness. It's a broader systems-based approach. Your philanthropic dollars actually can go in a much more catalytic way to affect systems change. And it can be a real complement to other funding that may be available. And I think with that sense, we've already begun fundraising for this, and there's a real receptivity on those donor-advised fund holders, advisors, and donors to that very notion. And so I think there's a lot of there, but it really does have to kind of lock in on people's notion that this is a problem for all of us, and that it's going to be a coordinated response that helps us to get there, and that there's a particular role for private philanthropy to play.
Are mixed income housing projects feasible and desirable? And this is a really vital question because for many developers, it's part of the terms of construction, but when you look at what actually goes up in brick and mortar, there are sometimes separate entrances, very clear delineations of where the quote-unquote affordable units are within a much larger building, and often contractual clauses where if the neighborhood surrounding a development improves, an owner can buy his way out of the terms of the agreement and go to market rate earlier than had been planned under various federal programs. So as a practical matter, are mixed income housing projects feasible and desirable?
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say yes.
Well, let's talk about feasibility. I think everybody agrees on desirability. What about feasibility?
So I think I will just admit I'm getting a little bit out of my area of expertise, talking about housing finance.
But you jumped right in.
Well, because I think it's both desirable, it's feasible, and in fact, it's necessary. Developing affordable housing, I think there's this idea that affordable housing should be cheap to develop because it's affordable. I think sometimes people have that misunderstanding, but it's very expensive and complicated to develop because the inputs are all the same. Land is still expensive, labor is still expensive. All of that is really expensive, but it's affordable to the renters. So in order to make a lot of these deals actually pencil out for the developer, they typically, if you're gonna do deeply affordable, there probably has to be some mixed income in there to make them work.
I think it is certainly desirable and possible, and I don't think that it's totally been unseen. I think there are all, especially in a I think people sometimes have complicated feelings about that word, but in a city where there's a lot of economic change, I think we notice all the time neighborhoods that are like right in the middle. It's my neighborhood right now. I'm living in Brookland, off North Capitol, and I rent out somebody's condo. So there are some people there who, make enough to own their condo, and maybe it was cheaper back when they purchased. There's me who pays, market rate for that condo, And then there's also folks who have vouchers or other things in that same building. It's not magic. We all just have a key. We come in, right? We lay our head down at night. Occasionally we knock, right? If, we need to, work something out. But it's not that complicated. And I think there are those moments where we see that in neighborhoods, and then they, drift, right? So I think that it is very doable to live with one another in racially and economically integrated environments. I think there can be just important depth of relationship and understanding built there. And yeah, it's possible. I don't think it's actually brain science. It's very
recommend the
doable.
separate entrances. I think that's.
I will say I've read about that in other cities. I have not seen that in the district. In fact, I don't think it would fly. We have some real strong legal advocates in this community.
In terms of separate entrances?
Yeah, I haven't seen it either.
Oh, no, I didn't say it was here, but.
But certainly separate buildings
but it
and
is
separate
built into the
neighborhoods.
design,
You know?
and it sends a very clear message to people who live behind both entrances of what's up.
I'd like to add to that. It's both in it. I've talked a lot, and I don't mean to repeat myself yet again, but I'm going to. A lot of it is about equity and access. So we do have some buildings where there are deeply affordable units, but in the financing, there's still just some practices that screen out people who have poor credit, prior evictions, criminal history. And so we may have funded mixed income, but we are still creaming in a way and not providing opportunity to people who there were structural things in place that caused them to be arrested when someone else wouldn't, who didn't look like them, that contribute to their criminal history, where they don't have the kind of family resources and wealth that they have accumulated debt and so forth. And so that needs to go hand in hand with the development if we want to see something different.
Thank you
Amen.
very much for your excellent questions. One of the most important jobs for a moderator, besides running a good conversation, is to get off on time. And I'm just about to do that. Please thank our panelists.
Yes, thank you everyone for being here this evening. Thank you again to our panelists. It really does show that it takes players across all sectors in order to make this work. It takes the government, it takes the nonprofit sector, it takes the media, and it takes the people we serve and where we work with in order to all come together and try to address this issue. It also takes you. And so we offer many great engagement opportunities, one of which will take place tomorrow. We actually have a training on advocacy that'll take place at 10 a.m. tomorrow at our La Casa residence. That's at 1444 Irving Street. It's across from the Target there, if you're familiar with it. So if you're interested, that's a great opportunity to learn about how you can apply your advocacy skills and learn a little more about that. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. That's a great way to keep up with all of the things that we are doing and learn more about the work that we are doing. You can follow our events on our website. One coming up in June is our French Embassy concert, which is a wonderful opportunity. And we also have our annual breakfast on May the 9th. We also look for financial support from friends like you. That's what makes symposiums like this possible. That's what makes all of our work possible. Generous folks just like you. So thank you for those who are currently supporting Friendship Place. For those who might wish to consider, we have conveniently left envelopes on chairs. But thank you all for being here tonight. This is a great panel. It was a great discussion. It was wonderful questions. And we really do appreciate everyone for being here. So thank you again.